Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of What If Naruto was sent in the fairy tale universe. If you guys enjoy this What If, and want to see part 2 of it, comment down below and let me know. And also go ahead, and check out other What Ifs in the channel. And check the description, for the creator of this great fanfic, and support them for making this fanfic. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content, it really means a lot. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. So yeah, I guess this is the first day of my diary. Damn, it feels weird talking to myself like this. I mean, do I really have to write every single day down? I've been here for ages already, and I haven't needed one. Even if Mayor-chan said it's a good habit and could help me get home, I still don't see how this'll actually help do that. Stupid woman for being so persuasive. Stupid Iro-senin for making me so soft. I've had enough of this already. Writing sucks anyway, I'm gonna train. Day went out. A few weeks, maybe months earlier. Kakashi was carrying an exhausted Naruto on his back after a monumental clash between the blonde and the leader of Akatsuki, a being simply known as Pain. The deluded man had attacked the hidden village of Konoha without hesitation, announcing his decision that it was time the village felt a pain comparable to his own. In one fell swoop, the self-proclaimed god turned the whole of Konoha into a crater, killing hundreds and injuring hundreds more. That was when the unpredictable blonde on Kakashi's back had arrived and confronted him. A whole lot of seemingly impossible things then happened that the Jonin could hardly begin to describe, such things like Naruto nearly losing himself to the Kyuubi, Hinata stepping up to Pain, the basin that once was the village being turned into a lake. Honestly, if he hadn't had it verified by several reliable resources, he wouldn't have believed it himself. He had been dead the whole time this happened though, so it was kind of understandable. And after all that, Naruto had managed to confront the true Pain, coerce him to stop the madness, and then, somehow, the man gave back life to every single person that was killed in the assault. It was as far-fetched as you could hope to imagine, but here he was, running through the trees, as alive as he was the day before the attack. But even with all the evidence, he still couldn't quite believe it. Despite this, Kakashi wasn't one to really pick at the details when something worked as well as this had, merely opting to just go with the flow. Smiling behind his trusty mask, his eyes shifted to the side to view the blonde mop of hair resting on his shoulder. "How you holding up there, Naruto-kun?" The mass of blonde shifted, and a blue eye became visible. "Yeah, holding in there. I'll be right after a good sleep, Tabayo." Kakashi's eye twisted upward as he smiled happily at the response. "Good to hear. We're nearly back, so just hold tight." Shifting his grip, Kakashi vaulted over a branch and suddenly twisted as a kunai nearly lodged itself in his throat. His feet landed on the side of a tree trunk, and he pushed off, shooting over to a large branch that was almost completely concealed by the foliage. Backing Naruto up against the trunk, Kakashi shielded his body as he withdrew a kunai from his leg holster, looking around suspiciously for the enemy. His sweat dropped when Naruto let out a soft snore behind him. Trust a boy to sleep through something like this. He had used up an incredible amount of chakra through the passing events, though so Kakashi couldn't blame him. Swinging around, the gray-haired Jonin deflected another kunai in line with his heart. Frowning, the Junin snuck a glance at Naruto. It was clear whoever it was, had no interest in Naruto. It probably wasn't the Akatsuki either. Intelligence indicated that they operated in pairs. Naruto had told him that Pain's companion had taken the body away somewhere to be buried, so they were accounted for. Suddenly, Kakashi had to catch a shuriken that nearly lodged itself in his belly. Ignoring the stinging cut on his palm, he flicked his hand, and sent the weapon back in the direction it came. He was rewarded with a rush of movement as a body shifted out of danger. Stealing another look down at the boy, Kakashi shook his head ruefully. This was exactly what he didn't need right now. Sighing, he lifted his headband, and revealed his Sharingan, looking to finish the fight quickly. It was frustrating though, because he couldn't leave Naruto undefended in such a state. Kakashi's one red eye managed to pick up the tiniest amount of movement off to his left, and quickly let off a hail of kunai. Instantly using the distraction, he bit down on his thumb, flicked his hands through some familiar seals, and slapped his palm down on the branch. There was a puff of smoke, and a small pug was suddenly sitting before the masked man. It raised a small paw in greeting. "Yo, Kakashi. What's doing?" Shaking his head, Kakashi pointed in the direction of Konoha. "No time, I'm currently being attacked and I need backup now. Naruto is with me and unconscious, so hurry." The small dog's eyes widened before nodding once and disappearing in a blur of motion. Silently wishing his friend's safety in the swift trip, Kakashi hunkered down and waited. Whoever it was that decided to attack was now taking a breather, gathering themselves for the next round. The Jonin's eyes flickered around cautiously, taking in every single movement within viewing range. Drawing a breath, Kakashi knew another attack was due any second now. Had it been under any other situation, he would have led the attacker away from his student. Damn this guy's timing. A hand flicked two kunai at Kakashi, which he quickly deflected. Narrowing his eyes, Kakashi wondered what the attacker was trying to do. Thus far, all he had managed to do was waste a few kunai and shuriken. It was almost like he was stalling for something. Kakashi's eyes whitened as he suddenly became aware of a sizzling sound behind him. One of the kunai had been tagged. Diving backwards, Kakashi grabbed Naruto's shirt and flung the boy away, just as the tag exploded. Taking the brunt of it, Kakashi was thrown backwards as he fell through the trees, bouncing painfully off the branches that filled the forest. He bit his lip as an old dead limb crunched under his weight, the sharp wood piercing his right thigh. Finally after that, the ninja broke through the last of the branches, to land solidly on his left leg, heavily favoring his new injury. Groaning, he grabbed the wood piece, and ripped it out. Blood squirted out of the hole, but quickly fell back to a trickle down his leg. Thankfully, it seemed it hadn't nicked an artery. Ignoring the pain, Kakashi started running towards the direction Naruto had been blown. He had to have taken some form of damage, after something like that. Being asleep meant he couldn't have tensed for the shock, and probably knocked him out cold. Diving around a rock, Kakashi's eyes widened as he saw a man in an Akatsuki robe kneeling over Naruto. He cursed his luck. Of course, now had to be the one time a solo agent was around. They must have been planning this from the start. That first attack on Kakashi was all just a distraction from the man's real goal. Something weird was happening before the man too. It seemed like the very air before him was being warped for some reason, spirals of matter twisting around in front of his face. Naruto seemed to be affected as well, as his body seemed to start dematerializing right before Kakashi's very eyes. With no time to think about it, Kakashi's Sharingan began to twist as it upgraded to the Mingekyo stage. Waiting his eye, Kakashi zeroed in on his target. Kamui, authority of the gods. Instantly, the air around the mystery man began to twist, as well as Kakashi's original technique began to suck the villain into a separate dimension. Sensing the attack, the Akatsuki member dived out of harm's way, growling loudly in annoyance. Unfortunately though, this left Naruto behind as the agent's self-preservation instinct didn't involve grabbing other people. The boy fell from the suction of the first technique right into Kakashi's own. Instantly aware of the horrific accident, Kakashi nearly cut off the technique, but remembered back to when he fought Deidara. He'd stopped the technique early and had successfully ripped the blonde man's entire right arm off. And with Naruto now halfway absorbed into the technique, Kakashi didn't even want to think about the end result of that. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, the Jonin had no choice but to finish the technique. His eyebrows quivered as the boy disappeared into the air, struggling not to show any emotion. He could only hope Tsunade-sama wouldn't completely decapitate him for this. He managed to take some comfort in the thought that Naruto was indeed being sent alive to another realm. Hopefully the boy would find a way to escape and get back. It didn't matter if Naruto didn't anyway, because Kakashi would be sending himself off to that dimension as soon as he was done here. Finishing up, Kakashi wiped his eye as a single tear of blood trickled out of it. Turning to face the Akatsuki agent, Kakashi's gaze hardened as he saw him running away. Whoever this person was, he was guaranteed a very painful death for what he had just done. Completely blocking out the pain from his leg, Kakashi vanished in a flicker as he raced to catch up with the offender. All Naruto knew was pain. Every single cell in his entire body was screaming at him. Unending agony, the likes which he had never experienced before. If his eyes were opened, all he could see was white. Immeasurably bright, pure, painful white. If his eyes were closed, all he could then see was black. Filthy, burning, hated black. He tried to scream, but found himself unable to. It seemed that wherever he was, there was no air. Had he the presence of mind, he would have wondered how even being alive was possible. Writhing in his torture, Naruto reached out feebly, trying to touch something, anything to ease his suffering. For what seemed like hours, he reached out, unable to cry, unable to keep his eyes open, unable to keep them closed, unable to do anything. He didn't know how long he reached, but eventually something grabbed onto his hand with a suction-like grip. His hand flailed around, desperately trying to drag himself towards it. Whatever it was, it felt cool, like a watered mattress only 1,000 times softer. His hand seemed to fall through it as he shifted, and as it did so, sweet relief came to the limb. That single fact pierced his consciousness like a bucket of ice, and with a mammoth effort, Naruto reached out with his other hand, and let himself be pulled through. Peaceful respite flooded his body as he was pulled free from the world of pain, flopping to the ground outside with a solid thump. The last thing Naruto saw before he passed out was a number of odd-looking trees surrounding him, and a strong feeling of natural energy. His eyes closed, and just as darkness claimed him, a strange voice called out in the distance. "Natsu, quit stalling already. I want to get home, and have a bath." "Nah, hold on a second, I smell something funny that way. But what about Mikao? We really should get him home to rest. He'll be alright. Come on, let's go check this out." "Happy. Go on ahead, would you?" "Aye, sir." Voices carried through the forest easily in the afternoon light, as three curiously dressed individuals veered off the road and began following the nose of the boy who had been identified as Natsu. The larger man was leaning heavily on his shoulder, looking like he had just come out of a rather brutal fight. He didn't look too much like he wanted to take this unnecessary detour either, but didn't really have a choice as he was dragged along energetically. Bounding out the three was a rather pretty young blonde girl, the type you'd expect to see in a fashion magazine, and not trekking through the mountains covered in dirt. She had a pout on her face as she stomped along after her companions, trying her best to convey her displeasure through physical means. She failed spectacularly. Natsu, Natsu. There's something weird just over that hill. Looking up, Natsu was greeted by a longtime friend floating in the air. A small blue cat with white fluffy wings protruding from its shoulders hovered just above them, pointing energetically over towards the anomaly. Hurry up. You might miss it. Quite literally smelling an adventure, Natsu let out a howl of excitement and charged off in a cloud of dust, leaving his female friend behind, squealing in embarrassment as she tried to stop her skirt blowing up and revealing everything underneath. Dashing over the hill, his eyes widened as he skidded to a stop. Natsu? Cough, where are you? I can't see anything cause of this stupid dust cloud you created. The girl ran from the dust, only to smack heavily into the backs of her two friends. Crying out, they all toppled forward and landed in a tangled heap. Happy floated down, looking curiously at the group as they tried to free themselves from one another. Lucy, it's not really the time for cuddles, you know. Growling, Lucy pulled her arm out of the group and glared at the cat. It's not my fault Natsu stopped so suddenly. You could have been of more use, and let me know, well you floated up there. Happy just shrugged and looked down at the still fallen men. I just thought you'd be fast enough to avoid them. It's not my fault if you're too fat and slow to stop in time. The girl started grinding her teeth together, glaring at the blissfully ignorant cat as she muttered death threats under her breath. Her grumbling was interrupted, though, when the strange occurrence caught her eye. Her eyes widened in surprise as she actually saw an arm floating in midair, looking like it was crawling from the center of a strange airborne whirlpool. Natsu, what's that? Heaving the cow off the top of him, Natsu jumped up and looked at the strange phenomenon before them. I dunno, looks like an arm. Lucy smacked the back of his head in frustration. I know that. But like, what's it doing in the middle of the air? Walking up to it, Natsu gave it a few experimental sniffs as he tried to work it out. No idea. Pretty cool, but hey. The girl shivered as the arm continued to grow rapidly from the hole. Someone's coming out. Hearing a groan, Lucy looked down at Macau, who was trying to push himself over. Can you help me out here? I can't see what the thing is, and I'm too weak to roll over. Pursing her lips, Lucy dug her toes into the man's side and gave him a kick, flipping him onto his back. Much better, thanks. Just then, a pained cry sounded out from the thing behind them, and Lucy dived behind a large tree in fear. Natsu just continued to stare at the torso that was being spat out from the hole. In a final heave, a blonde-haired boy popped out of the air and fell flat onto his back. His eyes flickered a few times before they closed, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Natsu. Lucy, I think he heard you the first 5 times. Shut up, you useless cat. Boy, Lucy, come have a look at him. Do you think he's dead? I certainly hope not. Cautiously approaching the unmoving human, Lucy looked over Natsu's shoulder. Seeing the slight rise and fall of his chest reassured her enough to walk past her friend and take a closer look. He didn't look all that unusual except for his clothing. He had a strange black and orange jacket on, along with a set of bright orange pants with a bandage wrapped around his right thigh. Actually, those strange marks on his cheeks were also a bit curious. Hesitantly reaching out, Lucy touched the mark before sharply pulling her hand back. Natsu and Happy were instantly beside her, looking in keenly. Oh, what happened when you touched him? Did he bite you? Lucy rolled her eyes, and ignored them as she rubbed her fingers together. Those whisker-like marks. They're actually in his skin. Blinking owlishly, Natsu stared at the marks before taking in a huge whiff through his nose. Heh. He smells super weird. What was that, Natsu? The boy looked over his shoulder at the still incapacitated man lying several meters back. I said he smells funny. Like nothing I've ever smelled before. Really? That's rare for your nose. Think we should bring him back to the guild. A smile broke out across Natsu's face when Macau suggested the next move. Yeah, sure. Lucy, you carry this guy. Imma grabbed Macau and we'll head back. Stiffening at the order, Lucy whipped her head around as Natsu quickly picked up his partner. Wait, what? You want me to carry this guy all the way back to the guild? Happy floated down beside her and looked at the boy. Well, he couldn't be much heavier than you. I struggle to fly when I carry you. Taking a swipe at the cat, Lucy missed and settled for shaking an angry fist at the animal. Shut your mouth. If you think he's so light, you carry him. Happy had already started floating away, ignoring the girl's protests. No, I can't, I'm just a little cat. How would I carry him? He's too big. Stomping a foot angrily, Lucy pointed at his back. You always carry around Natsu without a problem. Hearing no response, the poor blonde was left to grumble about crappy teammates and struggled to lift up the deceptively heavy boy. Oh, my head. Naruto's mind slowly began to kick back into gear as consciousness started to spread over his senses. His eyes twitched as he struggled to think back over what happened. There was that fight with pain, then Kakashi came and caught him, then sleep. It started getting fuzzy about that stage, and Naruto racked his brain to try remembering what happened. An explosion, then a hard landing, then someone standing over him. He remembered splitting an eye open and seeing someone in a black coat standing over him. Akatsuki. That would explain the pain that followed. But it was too fast, wasn't it? But still, did that mean he was dead? Groaning, Naruto wriggled a few fingers to try and test out the theory. There was something solid under his hands, a mattress perhaps. But why would heaven have a bed? A soft gasp off to his side made an ear twitch and Naruto tried to roll his head towards the noise. Who was that? Didn't sound like anyone he'd ever met before. Forcing all his willpower into muscle power, Naruto pulled his eyelids up, and a blurry world came into view. Everything was pretty white, so it could even be the hospital. It didn't smell artificially clean enough though, so it probably wasn't. There was a hazy mound standing off to the side which Naruto assumed was a person. The mound called out in a soft voice, but he couldn't make out the words. He shut his eyes and shook his head to try clear the fogginess. A wave of vertigo and nausea hit him which instantly made him stop. Very bad move. A pair of hands came to rest on his person, one on his chest and another under his head. They gently lifted him up and he felt a cup rest against his lips. Taking a test sip, he found it to be full of probably the sweetest water he had ever tasted. Quickly sinking the lot, he tried to say his thanks, but his voice just growled around in his throat. Giving up for the moment, Naruto just tried to work on clearing his vision. The water granted him some form of strength which was very well received and quickly put to use. Blinking a few times, the mound he saw previously came into focus. It turned out the mound was actually a white-haired girl in a poofy maroon full-body dress. It had a few frills around the neck which held the strapless piece up, the frills continuing down the front like he had never seen before too. She had very large blue eyes that seemed to exude nothing but concern and peace. The delighted upturn of her lips finished off her rather inviting appearance very well. The groggy boy decided he rather liked the strange look. Looking down, he saw another girl, this time blonde with a part of her hair pulled up into a ponytail on the side of her head, holding the cup which he suspected he drank from. She also had rather large eyes, this time brown, but just as inviting as the first woman's. She had a weird white and blue striped shirt on that looked like it was struggling to deal with the massive chest beneath it. She also had a rather short skirt on, but nothing Naruto hadn't seen before. Ino wore shorter. Letting his eyes drift across the room, Naruto picked up on another person in the room, this time male. Seeing his hair, he could now count all of 2 people he had ever seen that had naturally pink locks. He had a strange sleeveless black and gold trimmed, unzipped waistcoat over his shoulders with no visible shirt on underneath, and a weird scaly scarf wrapped around his neck. His lowers were covered with the remaining half of his waistcoat, the open front revealing short white trousers that were tied off at the knee with black ribbons. He seemed to be abnormally interested in Naruto too, if those wide staring eyes were anything to go by. Unconsciously creeping back into the wall behind him, Naruto cast a wary glance around. Seeing a striking red-headed woman decked out in complete torso armor, Naruto finally found the strength to push himself up. The first 2 girls reached out quickly as he sat up, hands held out to catch him in case he toppled forward. Taking another look at the warrior girl, Naruto couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Her entire chest was hidden behind a medieval-style chest plate which sharply contrasted with the simple, mid-thigh length skirt that covered her upper legs. A pair of matching metal gauntlets covered her crossed arms up to the elbow. The entire uniform was then finished off with long, knee-high black boots that were probably a lot tougher than they looked. Her piercing brown eyes never left him, obviously gauging his potential as a threat. Groaning, Naruto held a hand to his forehead and shut his eyes again as a headache made itself known. He heard what sounded like a male voice call out, but he still couldn't make out the words. Something must have been clogging his ears. Taking a deep breath, Naruto held his hand out towards the blonde. "More water please." It took a moment, but the cup was placed back in his hand, and he downed the second lot in a flash. Running his tongue over his lips, Naruto sighed happily. At that exact moment, what looked like a bald old midget decided to jump onto his bed. Crying out in surprise, Naruto backed away, and the thing was quickly reprimanded by the white-haired girl. Again he couldn't understand what was said, so he stuck a finger into his ear and wriggled it around. Popping it out, he sniffed and took another look at the man on his bed. He was definitely short and old, but still had some hair in the form of these comical tufts sticking out from the sides of his head, along with a matching white mustache that covered his upper lip. He was also dressed in a crazily colored orange and blue shirt, and some blue shorts with these little gnome shoes sticking out from under him. The thing that stood out most to Naruto though was the odd hat he was wearing. It was like a brimless cap, but with these 2 long thin antenna things that sprouted from the top of it and fell back over his head. It was striped blue and orange, and looked positively stupid. It seemed the old man knew the benefits of orange, but even that mighty color couldn't make the hat look any good. Naruto snorted and stifled a bark of laughter. What did this guy think he was? A magician? Shaking his head, Naruto looked around the group and eyed each person individually. So where am I? The room froze and looked at him with surprised eyes. Frowning, Naruto clicked his tongue and repeated himself. Oi, I asked where I am. The small man before him coughed and drew his attention. He then spoke in a typical old person's voice, the only difference being Naruto couldn't understand a single word that he said. This time, Naruto's eyes whitened as he realized something. It wasn't his ears that were wrong, it was just that they were speaking an entirely different language. Not quite sure what to do next, Naruto just looked around the room before sighing. Well, doesn't this just suck? The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Naruto regarded his acquaintances again. If ever there was a time he could scream bloody murder at his woeful luck, it was now. At least they understood gestures, if the refilling of the cup was anything to go by. Letting out another sigh, Naruto scratched his head. If only he knew where he was, he might have a chance of finding his way home. Hearing a cough to his left, he looked down at the old man. A few unintelligible words popped out of his mouth, that left Naruto looking at him with a completely blank stare. Hearing a pretty laugh, the first girl he saw stood forward and exchanged a few words with the old man. Whatever she said convinced him to nod and jump down off the bed. Smiling as she watched him walk back, the white-haired girl turned and gave Naruto a slight bow. Placing her hands on her rather ample chest, she patted it a few times. It took a finger pointing up to her face for Naruto to realize the chest patting wasn't the main aim of the gesture. The red-headed girl was giving him a rather scary look, while the girl before him just laughed humorously before repeating herself. Mirror Jane. Realizing she was telling him her name, Naruto nodded his understanding. Mirror Jane. Squealing happily, the girl clapped her hands, and then held her hand out in a questioning manner. It took a moment, but eventually Naruto realized she was asking him his name. Oh, Naruto. She raised a questioning eyebrow as she tried to repeat it. Naruto. Snorting, Naruto shook his head and tried again. Naruto. Smiling, Mirror Jane tried out the corrected name. Naruto. She then burst into a flurry of weird words that Naruto suspected were greetings or something. Who knew? Seeing his questioning look though, the girl stopped and gave him a sad smile before stepping back. She then said something which resulted in the pink-haired boy running forward and leaning way too far into Naruto's personal bubble. It must have been an invitation for the others to introduce themselves. Trying to get some space, Naruto held his hands out and gave him a shove. The boy's eyes whitened before a sharp blow to the back of his head from the warrior girl calmed him down. Taking a breath, he locked eyes with his new plaything and dragged his name out like he was talking to a child, all the while pointing at his face with both hands. Natsu. Rolling his eyes, Naruto sighed. Right, Natsu, got it. Next please. The blonde had to resist the urge to face palm when all he got was a vacant look. He couldn't even insult anyone here. What a way to take away a guy's power. He wasn't allowed to lament the fact either before the strong Reddit grabbed the boy and threw him into the back wall. Looking past the girl, Naruto whistled when he saw Natsu embedded into the wall face first. This girl was strong. Hearing her growl, Naruto quickly sat up straight and focused. She mightn't have been as strong as him, maybe, but for the moment, it'd probably be wise to pay attention. The woman said her name once, expecting him to remember it well. Naruto made sure to. Ursa. Thinking it'd be polite, Naruto bowed his head slightly in her direction, before repeating her name. Seemingly satisfied, she returned the nod with one of her own, and a smile before stepping back. Next up was the bouncy blonde girl who stuck her hand out with a smile. Lucy. Grinning, Naruto took her hand in his and shook. He was thinking he'd like this girl once he got to know her. Her squeal of pain, though, made him retract his hand in shock as Ursa swiftly seemed to pull a sword out of nowhere. The kunai was instantly in his hand as he calculated this news potential threat, while scoping out the nearest exits. The tension was quickly broken, though, as Lucy jumped between them, holding her hands out and saying something rapidly. Ursa seemed to be okay with whatever it was because the woman relaxed. She gave the girl a nod before her sword quite literally glowed before disappearing. Naruto's eyes whitened in surprise, but still had the mind to pocket his kunai. He hadn't seen his storage seal anywhere when that happened. His attention was brought back to Lucy though, as she gave him an apologetic look while saying something. It seemed she wasn't blaming him for the mistake. He accepted it with a sheepish smile of his own as he scratched the back of his head. How was he supposed to know her hand was that weak? Finally, that weird little man from before jumped forward and gave Naruto a healthy smile, raising a hand towards him in a salute. Makarov. The old man then extended his hand. Naruto hesitantly took it before quickly having to up the grip strength. For a little guy, he had a pretty strong hold. Dropping his hand, Naruto absently rubbed his knuckles as he looked around the group again. Mirror Jane said something to Lucy that had the girl running up the stairs, perhaps in search of something. Feeling his stomach rumble, Naruto held it unhappily. It felt like it had been forever since he had eaten. Looking at the white-haired girl, it seemed like she had the greatest chance of knowing where the food was. So in a universal gesture for food, Naruto opened his mouth wide and pointed. Lucy stood back as the master moved in to greet the new boy. She wiped away a few beads of sweat from her brow after having managed to successfully break up the fight that nearly happened between Erza and Naruto. Her hands still hurt from that shake. Even Erza's grip wasn't that strong. She shifted over slightly as Mary Jane moved up beside her. "Well, isn't this interesting?" Lucy nodded, giving her hand one last rub. "Yeah, I know. I mean, he doesn't even speak our language. I've never come across anyone who couldn't. I wonder where he's from." Mary Jane shook her head, just as confused as her friend. "I wouldn't know, sorry. But to appear from thin air like that, I've never heard of teleportation magic like that. Especially if it was causing him pain." Lucy frowned slightly. "It almost makes you wonder if he even wanted to come here. He might have been attacked by someone and had a spell cast on him." Mary Jane let out a light breath as she watched the blonde boy interact with the master. Suddenly, her eyes lit up as an idea came to mind. "Lucy, would you mind going and finding Levi for me? If there's anyone who could find out a way to talk to Naruto-san, it'd be her." Lucy's eyes widened as she heard the suggestion. "Good thinking, Mira-chan. I'll be right back." Dashing up the stairs, Lucy looked over her shoulder as she heard her well-natured friend let out a loud pretty laugh. Reaching the main dining hall, Lucy skidded to a stop before looking around. Seeing a tuft of blue locks, she smiled before calling out and running over. "Levi, there you are. Can I get you to come with me quickly?" The girl looked up from the book she was reading. Seeing one of her close friends, she smiled brightly and waved. "Lucy, what's going on?" Reaching her, Lucy threw a thumb over her shoulder at the door she came from. "That boy we found has finally woken up. You'll never guess what though, he speaks a different language." Instantly, Levi's eyes widened exponentially in glee. "No way. That is so cool." Lucy put her hands out, shushing her friend. "I don't think Master wants everyone to know just yet." Blushing, Levi scratched her cheek. "Oh, sorry. I get carried away sometimes. But yeah, take me to him." Gathering her stuff, Levi handed half of it to Lucy and they started walking. "So has he done anything cool yet?" Lucy shook her head. "No, not really. We found out his name though. It was Naruto, or something. Oh, and he's really strong too." I shook his hand, and he nearly crushed mine without even meaning to. Erza almost attacked him for that though. Both girls imagined the outcome and shivered. "Yeah, we wouldn't really want that to happen." Quickly shaking off the gloom, Lucy smiled as they neared the door. "It's okay, but I convinced Erza it was just a mistake. Mira-chan was actually the one who came up with the idea to get you down to see if you can do anything about the language barrier." Levi giggled happily at the prospect. "I hope so. I love a good challenge." Walking down the stairs and through the doors, both girls stopped dead and dropped their jaws with everyone else in the room, as they watched Naruto tucking into what seemed like his fifth bowl of food, if the empty plates were anything to go by. Quickly licking the remaining crumbs from the plate, he handed the dirty ones to Mira Jane as she passed him a full new plate. He sent her a beaming smile before nearly inhaling the most recent plate. "He's a hungry one." Sweat dropping at the girl's casual remark, Lucy turned and whispered into her friend's ear. "I take what I said back. Here's something interesting about him, he's a bottomless pit." Diggling into her hand, Levi nodded and walked over to an unoccupied table. Spreading out her things, she waved Lucy over. "I have an idea that may work. Just let me get my pen and a piece of paper and we'll get started." Naruto nodded his thanks to Mira Jane as she passed him another load of food. He had absolutely no idea what the stuff he was eating was, but it was delicious. Obviously it was no ramen, but still pretty damn good. Finishing off the plate, he sent his new most favorite girl in the whole world a charming smile, while waving the plate, asking for more. When he didn't get a response, he opened his eyes and saw a small blue-haired girl standing before him. Her shoulder-length hair was pulled back with an orange bandana, and her lithe body was covered by a short orange one-piece dress with white straps to hold it up. Like the other women he'd met thus far, she seemed to have rather large eyes, hers being a light brown. Having another look at her lovely dress, he smiled happily. This was the second person who knew the wonders of the magical color orange. He was rather quickly warming to these new people. They knew good clothes. Patting himself on the chest, he grinned at her. "Naruto." Seeing her giggle, she nodded and repeated the motion. "Levi." She then proceeded to lay out a sheet of paper before him, and pulled a pen from within her blouse. As Naruto looked down at it curiously, the girl wrote some strange glyphs down and pointed at them. "Naruto. Eh?" He looked at her blankly. Sighing patiently, Levi pointed at him, then at the marks. "Naruto." Thinking for a second, Naruto nodded slowly. It seemed she had written his name down. Seeing him begin to understand, Levi then handed him the pen. Looking at it curiously, she made a writing movement in the air, pointed at the paper, and said his name again. Holding the pen out hesitantly, he looked at her. Seeing her nod and say his name once more, Naruto wrote his name down as neatly as possible. It seemed the girl had something planned. Smiling thankfully at him, she took her pen back and then placed her hands on the paper. She said a few weird words, and then suddenly a bright gold circle filled with all manner of letters and pictures exploded from her hands. Instincts honed by years of battle sent him to the roof in an instantaneous jump, chakra flowing to his feet and gluing him to the ceiling as he stared down at her in surprise. Hearing a cry of disbelief, Naruto looked over at the now upside-down Lucy. Her eyes were wide, and a shaky finger was pointing up at him like she'd never seen someone use chakra before. Pursing his lips, Naruto wondered if they even had ever seen someone use chakra. The weird language, coupled with the strange dress style, weird writing and subtle differences in facial structure, was slowly convincing him he was somewhere very far away from home. Grinning awkwardly, he stood up and released his hold on the roof, flipping down to land gracefully back on his bed. During that time though, something weird had happened on the piece of paper. Ignoring the still pointing blonde girl, Naruto looked in with interest. The writing had been absorbed into the paper and replaced with something else. Levi then took her pen and wrote something down. Turning, she called out to the still unconscious Natsu. Urza quickly woke him up with a slap to the face, before pushing him over to Levi. She spoke to him, before he grinned and lifted his hand. Again, Naruto found himself wanting to jump to the roof, when his hand exploded into flame. Sending Natsu a wide-eyed look, Naruto wondered what else these weird people could do. The boy just laughed at Naruto's unease, and waved his hand around a little. This time, Levi pointed at the flames and said something in her language. She repeated the word a few times then pointed at the piece of paper. Naruto quickly caught on now that he understood the game. She was trying to compare their written language for some reason. She must have found a way to translate it. Enjoying the new game, Naruto let a smile creep onto his face. Fire. Laughing happily, Levi then handed Naruto the pen, and he quickly wrote down the word. This time, Levi didn't need to do anything, and the words faded into the paper together. Turning, the girl found a blank sheet of paper and pointed at it before writing down what it was. Nodding, Naruto took the offered pen and quickly wrote down what it was. He realized the process might take a while, but it'd be worth it in the end. It was taking a few hours, but the excitement on Naruto's face was more than enough to keep the group entertained as Levi worked. Natsu had needed to be forcefully evicted a little while into the session, after he started getting just as excited as Naruto, and began to spew flames everywhere. After he had been kicked out, the group had found Naruto firmly attached to the ceiling again, staring at the door they booted Natsu out of with owlish eyes. This time the shock wasn't as great, and the group laughed at him, extremely amused by the blonde's defensive reaction. Naruto had pouted rather heavily at this before flipping down to the bed, sulking to himself. Ignoring his discomfort, the brilliant girl before him had continued to toil away, slowly working through easily identifiable objects in the room. This continued on for another half an hour until Levi grinned and turned to face her friends. Alright. Hopefully this will work now. Fingers crossed. Looking down at the paper curiously, Urza frowned as Levi scurried around the room trying to find something that hadn't already been translated. So, what are you hoping to do? Levi's small backside answered as she rooted around in a cupboard. I think I have enough information from his language now to begin to translate our words to his. A lot of his characters have started repeating themselves in the words, so hopefully now I can write it down so he can understand it. The best part now is if I misspell anything, he can correct it for me and speed up the process even more. So all I need is something. Aha. Crawling out, Levi held up an old rock that had been hiding down the back of the cupboard for who knew how long. Running back up to Naruto, she sent him a grin and wrote rock down. Seeing him reach out for the pen, she grinned and shook her head. Not this time. Sorry. Let's hope this works. Quickly scribbling down some runes beside the word, it disappeared before reappearing as a word in the foreign script. Looking up hopefully, she saw Naruto's eyes widened, and a massive grin split his face before he tackled Levi in a massive hug, spinning her around a few times before setting the now dizzy girl down. He pointed at the piece of paper and started babbling away, probably asking how she did that. Holding her head, she stabilized herself before looking up at him and shrugging. Sorry, I can't really tell you how until I understand you better. The blonde seemed to understand the sentence as he grinned sheepishly and jumped back onto the bed. Nevertheless, first contact had been made. Sitting there with wide eyes, Naruto waited to see what was to happen next. Levi then smiled and handed him the pen, motioning for him to write something. He grinned and quickly started scribbling down a few words. Leaning back, he watched the paper intensely as it translated. Flicking up the result, the group leaned in. Hey, nice to meet you guys. Woo. Cheering loudly, Lucy high-fived Levi, and then gave her a quick hug. Letting the girl get back to work, Levi started studying what went wrong. Obviously this is just a first test, but we should be able to work out the lettering problems soon enough. There, that's fixed it up on our end. She then sent him the edited version. Reading it, he gave her the thumbs up to show he understood. Leaning in, Lucy pointed at herself. Do you mind if I have a go? Not at all. Clapping her hands happily, the blonde girl quickly scribbled down something. Standing back, they waited as Naruto tried to decipher the message. A moment passed before he grew a little pale and a small trickle of blood ran down his nose. Looking over in confusion, Levi questioned her friend. What did you write? Looking equally confused, Lucy shook her head. I just said he's wearing nice clothes, and I'd like a girl's set. Naruto absent-mindedly wiped away the small dribble of red from his nose. He had gotten excited when Lucy decided to write something down, but hadn't expected, I want taupe in her clothes like a girl pair. There was no chance she knew about his female transformation technique, but it didn't help that his imagination ran overtime at the idea. Pausing, Naruto tried his best to correct the mistakes, making sure to put a rather big question mark at the end. When it went through, Makarov and Mira Jane burst out laughing while Lucy buried her head in her hands, instantly bright red. Urza also had the most peculiar look on her face, like she couldn't believe what Lucy just wrote. Levi just laughed at her friend's expense and wrote down what she originally meant. Reading the updated version, Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. That could have gotten messy pretty quickly if they hadn't been so understanding. Sakura-chan would have sent him through a wall for even thinking it. He didn't think Lucy would want to write him any more messages anytime soon. Doing his best to compose himself, Naruto grabbed the pen and changed topics. So, where am I? Seeing the message received, he saw Levi and Makarov quickly talk between themselves before settling on something. Her pen flashed as she wrote down a couple of lines quickly before letting them sink into the paper. A moment passed and then they appeared. You're in currently the guild fairy tale. The area though called is Magnolia. Frowning, Naruto tapped his chin. The guild called fairy tale. Magnolia. Just where is this place? Taking the pen, he wrote down his questions very carefully, not wanting to cause any confusion. Magnolia. Where is that located in regards to the elemental nations? It went through but took Levi a second to properly correct the words. Once fixed though, she frowned in confusion and looked up at him. Quickly checking something with Urza, she wrote down her replies slowly. I'm sorry, but none of us have ever heard of that place. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.